Um, we had talked about really briefly stand your ground and preemption, and that kind of brings me into a very recent case that I heard about, but through you, um,
Mhm.
State versus Cameron.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
sure you're very well familiar with that. So I've been following ISAA for several years now, and I had never heard of this case. And
Yeah.
follow I follow Second Amendment cases because I'm a retired cop. That's kind of my thing, and Second Amendment stuff has always been my jam. Um, and people on my channel will know me better for the ham radio content that I do, but
Sure.
Second Amendment has always been a very, very important thing to me, and now it's become forefront, and I'm kind of
Yeah.
changing some of the stuff that I do. um so explain, can you explain, or number one, um, why haven't we heard of State versus Cameron until you brought it up very recently during his trial, actually?
Yeah.
And then I want you to explain what the Stand Your Ground bill and the preemption bill are all about.
Yeah. So I guess let's start first with why nobody knows about this case, and it's only briefly been brought to gun owners' attention. Part of that is so the actual event happened in August, and charges were filed, at that time. And we found out, I want to say in September, Senator Zito found out through a source, and ultimately that source got in touch with her, and then she got in touch with me and said, "Hey, we've got this case." And over the years, we have people that come to us and say, my husband or my son or my whatever is innocent, and so you start investigating these stories, and often you're kind of like, okay, but you can't do that. Like, you were good until you kind of screwed up here, or the
Yes.
or the person's got like this long rap sheet, and you're just like, okay, you were probably maybe okay and justified here, but you have like this criminal record, and like, so it makes it really hard to get the public to understand some of these situations. And so when we heard this guy's case initially back in September, everything sounded okay, right? We were
Hmm.
like, oh, this is really fascinating. I don't understand why you're being charged, and you end up charged with like 2 felonies, and brandishing, and actually another charge on top of that. But so I talked to the guy and I said, look, he's a current member of the Idaho Army National Guard. He's a Black Hawk helicopter pilot, no criminal record. And when you hear his story, you're kind of like, what in the world are we doing? This is
Just
insane.
a
This is
stand-up guy.
yeah, this is the Kyle Rittenhouse case essentially for Idaho. And I said, we can blow this up, right? We can start putting pressure on the county and the state to drop this insanity.
Hmm.
We can come out, and I can try and get national groups and everybody involved, and they may drop it, right? They may go, okay, this is stupid. Like, we gotta, like, let's just drop this case. It's not worth it. Or they could double down, right? And come up with more charges to throw on top of you. And ultimately, between him and his attorneys, they decided not to get involved, not to have the public get involved in the case. And so that's in large part why nobody really knew about it. In addition to that, there were no shots fired. Okay. He didn't have
Right.
to actually discharge his weapon. And I think had he killed someone, there probably would have been some more coverage.
There would
But
have been a lot more coverage. I think that it would have been more of a Kyle Rittenhouse type of a deal, I think.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
As it stands, I see this as more of a Daniel Penny.
Sure.
There was no
Yeah.
fire, there was no shots fired. There was no real force used. I mean,
Yeah.
it was that classic using a firearm as a deterrent and a way to diffuse a situation.
Yeah, and that's what I think is even scarier about this case is no lethal force was used. He never touched anybody,
Mm-hmm.
There's not even evidence that he pointed his gun at anyone. He says he had it in the low ready. And so you're like, holy crap! If this guy's getting railroaded with felonies and $35,000 in legal fees, good grief! Like, do I even go to defend my family and kids and risk that at this point? And this is in a Republican county, by the way, it's in Ada County. It's still a Republican DA. So,
Yeah,
so it's
yeah.
really scary when you sit there and go, man, this is kind of nuts. It just seemed like the Ada County prosecutor was like, you know what, we're bored. Let's just take this guy and go take him to court. It's total insanity.
I think that's freaking insane. I mean, is there anything that we as the gun community can do to basically slap their hand or to get them to stand up and listen and say and understand that we're not going to take that?
Yeah. So I think there's two things at play here. Number one, if our bill had passed, and we've been running the same legislation, variations of it, we'll change some wording here and there, or whatever, but the concept has been the same. But it's been like 4 or 5 years that we keep trying to pressure them to do this, and it's a tough haul because the prosecutors just hate it with a passion. And one of the guys, Senator Lakey, in the state legislature, is a former prosecutor, and he's who they all go to for gun bills. So we've got this major roadblock in there, and we've got several roadblocks in there. But so the gun owners have to get pressure, and I think this case is going to help us go, look, nobody knew about this case. So
Mm-hmm.
how many other Theron Camerons have been in Idaho that nobody has any clue about, including us? Like, I don't know. I don't sit there and follow the courts day in and day out. And I get cases that don't really match his, but how many have there been? And so what our bill does, it does two things. And one of our attorneys described it, or a good friend of ours who's an attorney described it as the anti-slap legislation for the Second Amendment. And if you don't know what slap is like, when you're getting sued, so you'll shut up, like people will sue someone just to keep them quiet. Hey,
Mm-hmm.
Idaho, Governor Little just signed into law, it actually won't go into effect till July, that you can't do that. And so what the anti-slap legislation does is says, we're going to take the end result and just have a judge look at it and go, okay, this is stupid. There's nothing here. There's no evidence here. This case can't move forward. And so the lawsuit ends within 30 days rather than in 2 years and millions or thousands of dollars, whatever it is. Well, our stand your ground bill says if you get arrested and you're within a couple weeks, within 2 weeks, you can invoke basically a stand your ground hearing. Says, look, I acted lawfully.
Mm-hmm.
I acted in self-defense. And then the government has to come up with something. They've got to show some evidence that you acted inappropriately. Okay, now it's not a super high bar to clear necessarily, but it's better than you sitting in a jail cell for 4 months while they just come up with something.
Right.
And so let's say the prosecutor sits down and goes, oh, screw it, I don't care. We're taking this guy to court. So they take you to court, and a jury, like they did with Theron Cameron, says not guilty. The judge will then ask the jury, why did you find him, or did you find him guilty because of self-defense? And if that jury says yes, okay, so that leaves an out in case maybe the prosecutor screws up and they had to do not guilty because of some screw up by the government. And so it's not by self-defense. But if they do find it by self-defense, the judge can then award attorney's fees. Now, the prosecutors, Grant Lobes in Twin Falls in particular, has thrown a fit about this. You might bankrupt one of the counties. You might bankrupt this. And I'm like, well, then if you have a good prosecutor, number one, and they're doing their job, they're going to look at the evidence of the case, which they should have done in Theron's case, and said, there's no chance we are going to get beyond a reasonable doubt. And when you sat and listened to the trial, and I actually just interviewed Theron, and that should be out here in the next hopefully week or so, you'll just sit there and go, this is nuts. Like, why was this case ever taken? And so it serves as a deterrent because, well, do we want to risk $50,000 to pay his attorney's fees on top of whatever the county spent on top of that to get a beyond a reasonable doubt? So that's what our bill would have done, was help him, number one, but probably have kept him out of this in the first place.